Howdy, guys. Let's see if we can go over chapter 8 in 15 minutes, which will be very hard and I'll talk pretty fast. But chapter 8 is a very long chapter that has a whole lot of concepts. So I'm just going to go over kind of what it's going to look like. And hopefully on Friday, when we're doing the midterm study session, we can go over any questions you might have on this. Okay? All right. So this chapter is all about cognition and language and intelligence. So cognition is pretty much the act of thinking. So it's the way we store and use information. Thinking is the use of knowledge to accomplish a goal. Knowledge is information that's stored in the long-term memory, which we learned about last week. Mental representation is bits of memory that represent objects, events, people. Usually you get that from sensory memory. Um, let's see. Let's go over some concepts here. So there is something called mental representation. That's the bits of memory that I just talked about. But they are stored kind of in the same mental category. So you've got again, think of a computer and a filing system. So you've got like an animal drawer where you can, or an animal folder where you can click on animal folder and you go like, oh, hippo, which kind of looks like elephant. So it's all kind of stored in subject matter. And the concepts are mental categories containing related bits of knowledge. They're organized around the meaning of the information, stored in verbal or propositional form, and used to perceive, think about, and deal with the world. So they tend to organize into hierarchical, which is the most fun word to say ever, and I highly recommend you all say it, hierarchical categories. So this is very important and will be on the test and the midterm. Superordinate category is the most general level. So that would be animals, right? Out of our elephant, hippo, giant general category, animals. And then there's the next level, which is called basic level category. And that is the first level that children understand. That will be on the test. But it's used most often to think about the world. So that's where you're going to get, I guess, more in depth with what an animal actually is. And then you have the subordinate category. So superordinate, basic level, subordinate. So subordinate category is less general and more specific. So again, that's where you're going to come up with elephant, hippo, things like that. All right. We acquire concepts as we observe and learn from the world around us. So babies obviously can acquire knowledge just from absorbing what's around them. It's not like you have to teach them the concept of what a dog is. They see you say dog and they look at a dog every time you talk about that dog and they acquire that information. There are formal concepts that are acquired as we learn rigid rules that define categories of things. There are natural concepts that develop naturally as we experience the world. There are prototypes, which is concept of most typical member of category. And exemplars are actual examples of concepts based on experience and or memories. So in this one, formal concepts will be on the test. And that means acquired as we learn rigid rules. All right. So where does our thinking get us? It is pretty much about problem solving. So some problems have obvious solutions, but others do not. I feel like you guys already know that. General problem solving has 6 stages. You identify the problem first, you represent the problem, plan a solution, execute the plan, evaluate the plan, and then evaluate the solution. So problems come in categories. There are well-structured problems, and there are ill-structured problems. So well-structured problems, there's a clear pathway to the solution. You can solve it in 2 ways. An algorithm always leads to correct solution. So an algorithm is like formulas. So if it's a math problem, or if you need to know like how many miles per gallon it's going to take to get there, there's a formula, which is an algorithm, and it will always lead you to the solution of the problem. Then there's something called heuristic. Heuristic, heuristic, and that's like a shortcut or rule of thumb. So that could be guessing. Or I think what we do a lot, trial and error. And this kind of problem solving usually saves time, because if you try 2 things and the second one works, you don't have to try 3 or 4 things, right? So concept for you that will be on the test is heuristic. And that is shortcut or rule of thumb. All right, so ill-structured problems are problems which there is no known algorithm. You have to use heuristic, enabling you to learn or discover something for yourself. So you have to use as many trial and error, shortcut, experiential things that you can to figure out the answer, the solution. So this is where they get the eureka, aha, light bulb moments. And hopefully they occur soon. And it's more likely to occur after thought and acquisition of knowledge about the problem. So the more you know about the problem, the easier it is to, solve it. All right. Let's talk about overcoming obstacles to problem solving. So this takes an ability to combine mental elements in new and useful ways, novel solutions or unique approaches. So that's kind of like coming up with think outside the box, innovative ideas, things like that. And it uses divergent thinking. So you get the ability to generate as many ideas as you possibly can very quickly, just in response to like one single problem, which is pretty darn awesome. I love problem solving. All right. There is something called functional fixedness. So functional fixedness will be on the test, and it means only seeing objects in a familiar role. So think of it like a spoon. We only think of spoons in terms of eating things, right? So generally liquids, or in my case, ice cream, which is kind of a solid. But think of other things that spoons can do. Spoons are digging instruments. You could dig outside with it. You could, use it to keep the puffiness out of your eyes if you freeze it and put it on your eyeball and things like that. So the functional fixedness is kind of already saying this spoon cannot be a solution because it's only for XYZ. When really, if you were open-minded about it and you thought outside the box, then you would see that it could be for anything. All right. Let's see. Let's talk about reasoning, decision making, and judgment here. So Um, Reasoning is drawing conclusions based on assumptions. Decision making is choosing among several options, picking the best one. And judgment is problem solving involving an estimation of probability. So that one goes a little bit deep. And then deductive reasoning. Think of Sherlock Holmes. I don't know if any of you have seen the new Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch, but this always makes me think of him every time I talk about this. But deductive reasoning um, is reasoning from general to specific. So think about that top down, bottom up kind of processing that we learned about in chapter 7. Um, the general rule of deductive reasoning um, is basically, studying leads to good grades. So that's general to specific. General studying, good grades, specific. So Melissa gets good grades, therefore she must study. So that's the general to specific. Then there's inductive reasoning, and that is the opposite. It's specific to general. So, for instance, classmates who do well seem to study hard, right? So, studying helps students do well. You're going from specific to general. And both of those are going to be on the test. So please make sure that you're studying deductive and inductive reasoning. Okay, I'm running out of time here. Got to talk faster. So decision making is, choosing from several alternatives and factors influencing outcomes are perceived outcomes of decision, probabilities of achieving these outcomes, and how possible outcomes are framed. So you also are going to look at the loss aversion and risk aversion. All right. Judgments. Um, Judgments are a type of problem solving in which we estimate the probability of an event. So we can solve using an algorithm or formula and heuristic solutions. So we tend to rely more on heuristic solutions for judgments. And which one is chosen depends on the situation and the characteristic way that one tends to think. I am definitely a judger, so that definitely leads my thinking in a certain way. So a rule of thumb or mental shortcut can be used, and remember that's part of heuristic stuff. So it can be used to lead to a correct solution. All right, heuristic is enabling a person to discover or learn something for themselves. That's the availability heuristic. So the more easily we can recall memory for an event, the more frequent we estimate the event to be. So think about fatal car crashes versus fatal airline crashes. So if you can remember seeing a whole lot of car crashes, then that's probably the first thing that you can recall for an event. All right. Then there's the representativeness heuristic. That was really hard to say. Representative heuristic. So, judging whether or not an object or event or person belongs in a particular category. You make judgments based on the concept of the category. So, for example, muscular men are probably construction workers or firemen or athletes, but probably not bankers. And this can lead to prejudice, obviously, by influencing judgments without knowing for sure.